The manager looked at the man standing at the counter and made a decision in under 2 seconds. "We collect payment before we prepare your order," he said. His voice was flat, professional, the kind of voice that had learned to deliver cruelty without inflection. "I policy for walk-ins." The man at the counter was wearing a faded army jacket, missing 2 buttons. Jeans that had been washed until the color had gone somewhere else. Boots held together by habit more than stitching. He was carrying a backpack that had seen better decades. He looked like someone who had been walking all day. He had been. He reached into his pocket and put his money on the counter without argument. Didn't say a word, didn't react, just paid and waited. What the manager did not know, what no one in that restaurant knew, was that the man in the army jacket had founded the restaurant, had built it from nothing, had poured years of his life into making it a place where exactly this kind of person would be welcomed, rather than watched. And he had spent the last 11 days watching what had happened to that promise. What he was about to find out would change everything. The restaurant was called Open Door Kitchen. If you had heard of it, you probably had strong feelings about it. It was that kind of place. Not fancy, not trendy, just a chain of fast food restaurants built on a single idea that most people considered either inspiring or naive, depending on their general outlook. The idea was this: everyone who walked through the door would be treated the same. Didn't matter what they were wearing. Didn't matter how they smelled. Didn't matter whether they had $20 or nothing. The prices were lower than anything comparable in the markets they served. And for anyone who truly couldn't pay, the policy was clear. You were fed anyway. No questions, no paperwork, no humiliation. Just a meal and a moment of being treated like a person. Keanu Reeves had started Open Door Kitchen 11 years ago. The idea had come to him on a cold night in Reno, Nevada, when he had stopped to buy a meal for a man named Harold, who was sitting outside a fast food restaurant with a cup he was too proud to extend. Harold had been a construction foreman for 22 years before an injury took his livelihood, then his savings, then his apartment. When Keanu sat with him for over an hour that night, Harold had said something that had never fully left. "The worst part isn't being hungry," Harold said. "The worst part is walking in a close and fighting counter. Decide what you are before you open your mouth." That was the seed. Open Door Kitchen grew from that conversation. The first locations opened in Sacramento, California. Keanu was behind the counter himself for the first 3 months, learning every employee's name, refining every policy, making sure the promise was real rather than decorative. Over the years, the chain had grown to 30-foot branches across the western states. Fiction had scaled. And as the mission scaled, Keanu had stepped back, trusting the people he had placed in charge to carry the thing he had built. Perhaps, he would admit later, he had trusted too much and watched too little. The letter came on a Thursday morning. Plain white envelope. No return address. Postmarked from Victorville, California. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, handwritten in careful, tight letters that suggested the writer had rewritten it more than once. "Mr. Reeves," the letter said, "I don't know if you will ever read this. I don't know if you even care what happens in the places with your name on them anymore. But I'm writing because someone needs to know what is happening at your restaurant in Victorville. The manager treats us like we are nothing. Our pay is being stolen. We are afraid to say anything. Please, if you are the person people say you are, please help us. No signature. Keanu read it 3 times. The sensible thing would have been to forward it to the operations team, to let the proper channels do their work. He had people for exactly this kind of situation. But there was something in the handwriting, the way the letters had been pressed into the page. The visible effort of someone who had been holding something in for a very long time and had finally, at considerable cost to themselves, decided to let it out. And that last line, if you are the person people say you are, not asking for justice, asking whether kindness from someone with power was even possible. He made his decision that night. He would go himself, not as himself, as no one. The preparation took a week. He let his beard grow. He found an army jacket at a Salvation Army in Pasadena that smelled like someone else's life. Jeans from a Goodwill bin. Boots from the back of a closet that hadn't been touched in years. A backpack he scuffed against the driveway until it looked appropriately defeated. He drove his old pickup to Victorville and parked a mile from the restaurant. The walk gave him time to settle into the character, to slow his pace, to let his shoulders carry a different weight, to become someone the world had stopped looking at directly. By the time he reached the front door of Open Door Kitchen, he was invisible. The restaurant was busy, tables full, registers working, the kitchen humming behind the counter. But the first thing that struck him, the thing he noticed before he noticed anything else, was the silence. He had visited many of his restaurants over the years, always unannounced, almost always delighted. Laughter between orders, employees joking over the fryer, the ambient noise of a place that was actually working the way it was supposed to work. This was different. The employees behind the counter moved with mechanical precision, heads down, eyes on their tasks. Nobody spoke unless an order required it. Nobody smiled. The sounds were entirely functional. The beep of registers, the hiss of oil, the soft thud of trays, and between those sounds there was nothing. It was the silence of a place that had learned to be careful. He walked to the counter. The young woman at the register looked up. Her name tag said Rachel. She was mid-twenties, dark hair pulled tight, the kind of face that would have been warm if it hadn't been working so hard to stay neutral. Her eyes went to him and then immediately to the space just past his shoulder, checking for something. Before she could speak, a shadow appeared beside her. A man had stepped out from somewhere behind the counter, late 40s, solid build, close-cropped hair. His name tag read Craig, and below the name it said shift manager. He looked at Keanu the way someone looks at a problem they have already decided how to solve. This one pays first, Craig said to Rachel, low voice, almost casual. Take the money before you make anything. Rachel flushed. She turned to Keanu. I'm sorry, sir. Would you mind paying before we prepare your order? Keanu kept his face neutral. He had written the policies for this restaurant himself. Pay what you can. No one turned away. No one treated like a transaction. Those words were in the employee handbook. They were on the wall behind the register. They were the entire point of the place. He pulled out the crumpled bills from his jacket pocket. No problem, he said. Rachel took the money with hands that were very slightly trembling. She counted it twice, then a third time, as if a mistake in either direction was a catastrophe she could not afford. Craig watched the transaction with cold, evaluating eyes, then turned and walked back toward the office without another word. Keanu took his tray to a corner booth. He sat with his back to the wall, the way a man who has learned to watch a room sits, and he began to watch. What he saw over the first 3 days built a picture that was difficult to look at and impossible to look away from. He watched Craig walk through the dining area and saw every employee behind the counter stiffen slightly as he passed. Not dramatically, just a small automatic adjustment, the physical language of someone accustomed to navigating around an unpredictable thing. He watched a young employee named Blake, maybe 22 or 23, with the eager energy of someone in their first real job, accidentally knock over a drink cup at the beverage station. Water went across the floor. Blake froze with his face going pale. Craig's voice cut through from across the restaurant. "If you can't handle a cup without spilling it, I'm not sure what we're paying you for." Blake didn't argue. He didn't explain. He said, "I'm sorry," and knelt down to clean it up. And his shoulders were curved in the posture of someone bracing for something more that didn't come, but was still somehow expected. Nobody reacted. Not the other employees, not the customers. It was as though this happened often enough that the room had learned to absorb it without registering it as unusual. That was the part that bothered Keanu most, the normalization of it. On the 4th day, he noticed a man working the kitchen who was different from everyone else. His name tag said Earl. He was older, maybe early 50s, with the broad, unhurried competence of someone who had been doing physical work for many years. Where every other employee seemed to shrink a little when Craig walked by, Earl simply continued. Flipping burgers, wrapping orders, calling out ticket numbers with the same steady rhythm, regardless of whether the manager was watching or not. It wasn't defiance. It was something quieter than defiance. It was the composure of a man who had decided somewhere along the way that his dignity was the one thing he was going to keep regardless of what was taken from him. Keanu made a mental note. If anyone in this place knew what was really happening, it was probably Earl. On the 6th day, as he was refilling his water at the beverage station, Blake appeared beside him. The young man glanced toward the office instinctively before he spoke. "You've been coming in every day," Blake said quietly. Keanu nodded. "You should be careful," Blake said. His voice was almost below hearing. "People who ask questions, or just seem like they're paying attention, they tend to disappear from the schedule." He moved away before Keanu could respond. Keanu sat down with his water and thought about that word, disappear. The 2nd week, he went looking for evidence. On the 8th day, he lingered near the back hallway, pretending to check his phone while he read the bulletin board outside the break room. A shift schedule was posted, and when he found Rachel's name, something didn't add up. Rachel, Monday through Friday, 6 hours each day. But he had been watching. Rachel arrived before the restaurant opened. She was still there when he left in the evenings. He had been tracking the hours. Not for any formal reason, just because he was paying attention, and paying attention was what he did. She was working 9 hours. Sometimes more. Every single day. He photographed the schedule with his phone. That night in his motel room, he ran the numbers again. 3 hours a day. 5 days a week. Somewhere around 15 hours of stolen time every week from a single employee. Multiply that by however many employees were being shorted. Multiply that by however many locations were doing this. The number that emerged made his jaw tighten. On the 9th day, he found a moment alone with Earl. The older man was cleaning the grill in the quiet stretch between lunch and dinner. Keanu stood nearby and kept his voice low. 3 years you've been here, Keanu said. He had asked a few indirect questions earlier in the week and done the math. Earl kept working. About that, you seem steadier than everyone else. Fear doesn't help the burgers get flipped any faster, Earl said. I learned that a while back. Have you seen things here that aren't right? Earl stopped what he was doing. He turned slowly and looked at Keanu with the direct, measuring attention of someone who had been around long enough to know when a question wasn't casual. Who are you? He asked. Someone who doesn't like watching people get treated badly, Keanu said. Earl held his gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to the grill. He said, not now. The next day, Earl found him at the counter. He didn't look at Keanu when he spoke. Kept his hands moving, doing something with the condiment station. You asked what I've seen. Yu kept his eyes forward. I've seen Craig open the register after closing, 4 times in the last 2 months that I know of. He counts the cash, folds it, puts it in his jacket. No receipt, no documentation. Why haven't you reported it? A sound came from Earl that might have been a laugh in a different context. Someone reported something last year. Different issue, same category of wrong. She'd worked here 4 years. Gone within a week. Official reason was performance issues. He paused. I have a mortgage. No, I'm not the next example. Keanu said nothing for a moment. Thank you for telling me, he said finally. Earl nodded once. He was already moving away. The following day, Earl appeared behind the restaurant near the dumpsters. He pressed something small into Keanu's hand, a USB drive. Security footage from the break room camera, Earl said. His voice was low and rapid. I copied it before the system auto-deleted. Last Tuesday after closing, Craig opens the register, counts the bills, pockets them. No paper trail. Why are you giving me this? Earl looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, there was exhaustion in it, and something beneath the exhaustion that was harder to name. Because you're the first person who's come in here and asked questions without looking afraid of the answers. And because I'm tired of watching decent people get ground down by someone who should be protecting them. He met Keanu's eyes. Do something with it before more people get hurt. Then he walked back inside. That night, Keanu sat at the motel desk with his laptop and the USB drive. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Craig. Alone in the break room after closing. The register key. The bills counted with practiced efficiency. The jacket pocket. No hesitation, no looking around. The movement of someone who had this so many times, it had stopped feeling like theft and started feeling like a transaction. Keanu stopped the video. He thought about Rachel's trembling hands. About Blake cleaning up spilled water with his shoulders curved against a blow that didn't come. About Earl flipping burgers for 3 years with the composure of someone who had decided survival. Was the ceiling of what was available to him. Then he opened the company's internal network. As founder, he still held the highest level of access, something he had rarely used in recent years, trusting his management team to run the operational details while he focused on the larger picture. Tonight he used it to search for something specific. Manual wage adjustments. Western region. Last 18 months. The results loaded line by line, and as he read through them, the scale of what he was looking at became clear. Victorville was not alone. The same pattern appeared in Bakersfield, in Stockton, in Modesto, in Redding, in Lancaster, in Hemet, in Yuma, Arizona. In Reno, Nevada, 9 locations in total, all showing the same irregularities. Low reported revenue against high customer traffic, ingredient costs that didn't match actual usage, and most damning of all, systematic downward adjustments to employee hours, all of them falling just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic audit. Every single adjustment had been approved by the same person, Douglas Merritt, Regional Director, Western Division. Keanu pulled Douglas's personnel file. The photograph showed a man in his early 50s, silver, hair, the kind of careful grooming that announced itself without announcing itself. 14 years with the company, consistently excellent performance reviews, praised repeatedly for his ability to maintain profit margins in what the reviews described as challenging market conditions. By every official measure, a model employee, but the numbers didn't lie. Keanu kept searching, went deeper into the archive files, and found what he had been afraid of finding, an internal email sent from Douglas Merritt to the managers of all 9 branches. Subject line, Q3 Labor Cost Alignment, Operational Guidelines. He read it carefully. It was businesslike, precise. It instructed branch managers to reduce reported labor hours while maintaining current productivity levels. It instructed them to document any employee who raised concerns as having cultural alignment issues. It specified that this instruction should not be preserved in writing beyond the communication itself, and that the email would be deleted from the server within 72 hours. Keanu read it 3 times. He sat back in his chair. This was not one bad manager running a rogue operation. This was a system, designed deliberately, hidden carefully, built to extract money from the pockets of the people who had the least ability to fight back, and wrapped in the language of operational efficiency so it could be defended if someone looked at it from the wrong angle. It had been operating under his name. Under the name of a restaurant he had built for the people it was now stealing from. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number. Her name was Sandra. She had worked at the Open Door Kitchen location in Stockton for 4 years before being terminated for, as the official record put it, creating a divisive work environment. What she had actually done was compile documentation of payroll irregularities and submit it to the company's Human Resources Department. 1 week after her submission, she was gone. Keanu had found her name in the archived HR complaints. Complaints that had been filed, received, and quietly buried without any visible action. She was guarded on the phone. She had signed papers when she was let go. She had been told, in careful legal language, that further discussion of her employment or the circumstances of her termination could have consequences. But she agreed to meet. They met at a diner in Fresno, on neutral ground, in a booth near the window where she could see anyone who walked in. She was in her early 40s, with the steady, careful manner of someone who had learned to trust slowly and was doing so now against her better judgment. She ordered coffee and didn't touch it. She told him about 4 years of work, about noticing the discrepancies, small at first, the kind of thing you could convince yourself was a system error, about keeping records because something told her she would need them, about going to HR, about losing everything the week after. "Do you know what's like?" she asked. She wasn't angry. That was the thing. The anger had long since converted into something steadier. To do the right thing and watch it cost you everything while the people who were doing wrong got promotions and bonuses. "I'm starting to," Keanu said. She reached into her bag and put a manila folder on the table. "I made copies of everything before they locked me out of the system," she said. "Every payroll record, every email I could get to, every note I took. I kept it because I needed to know the truth existed somewhere, even if nobody believed it." He opened the folder. Inside was the same email he had found in the archive, the Douglas Merritt email, her copy of it, which meant she had reported it to HR, which meant HR had received it, and done nothing. "I want to ask you something," Sandra said. "Not about any of this. Go ahead. Why are you here? Why are you doing this yourself instead of sending someone from your legal team?" Keanu thought about the letter on the lined notebook paper, about the handwriting pressed hard into the page, about the question embedded in it. "Because someone wrote to me by hand," he said, "and asked whether kindness from someone with power was even possible." He paused. "I wanted to find out." Sandra looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, something more complicated. The look of someone who had been carrying a weight alone for a very long time and is feeling another person's hands on it. "Then do something with it," she said. "Actually do something. Not a press release, not a committee, something real." "I intend to," he said. Back at the motel that night, Keanu called a man named Walter. Walter had been with Open Door Kitchen since the second year, Chief Operations Officer. One of the small number of people Keanu trusted without reservation, not because Walter told him what he wanted to hear, but because he had consistently told him what was true even when it cost him something. "I need to see you in person," Keanu said. "And I need you to bring legal counsel." A pause. "How serious is this?" Keanu looked at the evidence spread across the desk. The USB drive. Sandra's folder. The photographs from the shift schedule. The private investigator's report he had commissioned 2 days ago and had just finished reading. 9 locations, he said, 14 months at minimum. Somewhere in the range of $2.5 million in stolen wages and diverted cash. He paused, and it runs to the regional director level. Silence on the line. "When do you want to meet?" "Day after tomorrow. Los Angeles. I'll be there." "Walter." Keanu stopped. "Don't tell anyone else about this before we meet, not until we have a plan." "Understood," Walter said. The meeting happened in a private conference room in downtown Los Angeles. Walter arrived with the company's general counsel, a sharp, deliberate woman named Claire, who specialized in labor law and corporate compliance. Keanu arrived with the full documentation. He laid it out on the table item by item. The shift schedule photographs, the payroll discrepancy records, the security footage from Earl's USB drive, Sandra's folder, the private investigator's report on Douglas Merritt's personal finances, significant personal debt, a pattern of withdrawals from accounts connected to each of the 9 affected branches, careful and deliberate enough to avoid triggering automatic scrutiny. Claire reviewed each piece with practiced efficiency. When she finished, she set the last document down and looked at Keanu. "This is thorough," she said. "More than enough to move forward. What are our options? You can handle this internally. Terminate Merritt and the branch managers involved. Compensate the affected employees. Implement controls. Keep it private." She paused. "Or you can go through proper legal channels, which means law enforcement, public disclosure, and a process that will be messier and longer but will result in actual accountability." What happens if we keep it private? Claire was quiet for a moment. Merritt signs an NDA, receives a negotiated separation, and eventually lands somewhere else where he does the same thing to different people. The branch managers scatter. The employees who were stolen from receive compensation and a brief explanation. The company moves on. Walter looked at Keanu across the table. That's the approach that minimizes institutional damage. It's also the approach that makes us part of the system that allowed this to happen, Keanu said. Walter didn't argue. Keanu turned to Claire. What does going through legal channels look like? Slower, more expensive, more public. But if the documentation holds, and this documentation holds, Douglas Merritt faces criminal charges for wage theft and embezzlement. The branch managers who participated face civil liability at minimum, and the affected employees have standing to pursue claims for back wages and damages. And the company's reputation takes a hit in the short term, Claire said, and potentially recovers in the long term, depending on how the narrative is handled. Keanu thought about Harold, sitting outside a fast food restaurant on a cold night in Reno. He thought about what Harold had said about what it felt like to be looked through. The silence is what allowed this to happen, Keanu said. If we handle it quietly, we become another reason for people to stay silent. Another reason for the next Merritt to believe there are no real consequences. He looked at Claire. Initiate legal proceedings. All channels. Claire nodded. And I want every affected employee's wages calculated to the cent, Keanu said, with interest. I want that money in their accounts before any of this becomes public. They moved fast and quietly for 10 days while the legal framework was assembled. During that time, Keanu returned to Victorville one more time. He found Rachel alone in the break room during a quiet afternoon hour. She looked up. Bits when he entered, and the fear was immediate. The automatic caution of someone who had learned that unexpected moments were usually unpleasant. When she recognized the man who had been coming in every day for 2 weeks, the fear shifted to confusion. He sat down across from her. Not too close, just close enough to speak without being overheard. I know what's happening here, he said quietly. I know your hours are being falsified. I know your pay is being stolen. Rachel's face went pale. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. I'm not here to cause trouble for you, Keanu said. I'm here because I want you to know that someone is listening. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, a single tear slid down Rachel's cheek. She didn't sob. She didn't make a sound. The tears came the way tears come when they've been held back for a very long time. Quietly, steadily, the way water rises rather than falls. Every time something goes wrong, she said, her voice barely holding together. They ask me what I did wrong. They ask me why I was slow, why I made a mistake. Nobody ever asks if something is being done to me. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. I kept thinking maybe it is my fault. Maybe everyone else can handle it, and I'm the one who can't. It is not your fault, said. She looked at him. He held her gaze steadily. Whatever they've told you, whatever they've made you feel, it is not your fault. Something moved across her face. Not relief yet. Something earlier than relief. Something like the moment before relief when you first start to believe it might be possible. She reached into her apron pocket and took out her phone. Her hands were shaking as she found what she was looking for and held the screen toward him. Records. Photographs of the shift schedule with her name on it. screenshots of her bank statements. The discrepancy between hours recorded and deposits received was documented with the quiet, careful thoroughness of someone who had decided to protect themselves with the only tool available. "I work 9 hours almost every day," she said. "They pay me for 6. Every week I'm short around $90. That's not enough to fight over by itself. But it means I can't pay rent on time. It means I choose between groceries and my phone bill." She scrolled through more images. "I kept all of it, because I thought someday, maybe, if the right person looked." "Someone is looking," Keanu said. She held his gaze. "I believe you," he said. The confrontation with Douglas Merritt happened in his own office. The regional headquarters was in Reno, Nevada, a deliberate choice, since Nevada law permitted recording a conversation with the consent of one party, a detail that mattered. Keanu arrived with Walter and Claire. No announcement, no scheduled appointment. Merritt's assistant looked up with visible surprise. Keanu walked past her. Douglas Merritt was behind a large desk when they entered. Awards on the walls, a view of the mountains, the careful, assembled evidence of professional success. He looked up and his expression moved through surprise into something that tried to become warmth. "Keanu," he said, rising, "I didn't know you were coming." Keanu did not take the offered hand. "Sit down, Douglas." The warmth collapsed. Merritt sat. Keanu opened the folder he was carrying and began placing documents on the desk, one by one. Shift schedule photographs, payroll discrepancy records, Sandra's documentation, the security footage log describing Earl's evidence, the private investigator's report, the financial analysis showing the flow of diverted funds, and finally, the email, the Q3 labor cost alignment email, the one that had been sent from Douglas Merritt's account to 9 branch managers, with instructions to falsify hours and suppress complaints, and which had apparently been deleted from the server, but had not been deleted from Sandra's files, or from the archived backup drive during the legal preparation that Claire's team had recovered during the legal preparation. Merritt stared at the document for a long time. "You think you can walk in here and accuse me?" he started. "You're looking at the evidence," Keanu said, "not an accusation." Merritt's jaw worked. "I made decisions that kept this company profitable. You were gone. You were off doing other things, other causes. Someone had to manage the operational reality." "The operational reality," Keanu said, "is 9 locations where employees were paid for 6 hours when they worked 9, where managers pocketed cash after closing, where anyone who raised concerns was terminated and called a cultural fit problem." He paused. "The operational reality is $2.5 million that belonged to the people who couldn't afford to lose it. Those margins were achieved by stealing from people earning minimum wage, not by efficiency, by theft. The financial records prove exactly where the money went." Merritt's face had gone the color of old concrete. "I had debts, obligations. 14 years I gave to this company, 14 years. You received a salary," Keanu said, "a good one. What you took beyond that on to Rachel and Earl and Blake and Sandra, who you fired for telling the truth, and every other person across 9 locations who came to work every day trusting that someone was looking out for them." Silence. "This is over," Walter said. His voice was formal and final. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties pending criminal proceedings. Your access to company systems has already been revoked." Merritt looked from Walter to Claire to Keanu. And the thing that had been trying to maintain itself behind his eyes, the authority, the justification, the story he had been telling himself about what he was doing and why, finally gave out. "Please," he said. His voice had changed completely. "I have a family." "So does Rachel," Keanu said quietly. "So does Earl. So does every person across 9 locations who went home short every week because of the decisions you made in that email." Merritt's head dropped. He didn't say anything more. What came next was not fast. It never is when the truth has been buried for a long time. Douglas Merritt faced criminal charges for wage theft, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The case took 14 months to fully process through the courts. It resulted in a conviction, a sentence that included restitution payments to every affected employee, substantial fines, and significant restrictions on his ability to hold positions of financial authority for years to come. He had time, sitting with the consequences, to understand something he had not understood when he was building the scheme. That the efficiency he had thought he was creating was not efficiency at all. It was extraction. He had taken from people who couldn't afford to give, dressed the taking in was management, and convinced himself it was management. The realization didn't absolve him. He didn't expect it to. But it was real, and it was the beginning of something he hadn't had before, an honest accounting of what he had actually done. Craig and the other branch managers who had participated in the scheme faced civil liability and employment termination. Several faced their own legal proceedings. The affected employees received their bag calculated to the cent with interest before any of the proceedings became public. And then Keanu held a press conference. He could have handled it quietly. He knew that. He had been advised to handle it quietly. The arguments for doing so were reasonable, and he had considered them seriously. He stood in front of the cameras anyway and said what was true. "I could have kept this private," he said. "Many people told me to. And I understand why. But silence is what allowed this to happen in the first place." The employees who were being stolen from stayed silent because they had been taught that speaking up meant losing everything. Douglas Merritt operated with confidence because he correctly assessed that the company would prioritize its reputation over transparency. He paused. "I am not going to be part of that calculation. Not now and not going forward." He outlined 3 new permanent structures within the company. An anonymous reporting line, staffed by an independent third party, available to every employee at every location. Any report would be investigated by a team with no reporting relationship to the company's management chain. A legal assistance fund for any open-door kitchen employee who experienced wage theft or workplace retaliation, with access to legal counsel at no cost, and a new mandatory training program called the Work of Respect, designed around a single foundational question: what does it mean to lead people rather than use them? A company cannot be strong if it is built on the fear of the people who make it run, Keanu said. And a leader cannot be trusted if they only behave well when someone important is watching. He looked into the cameras. These changes are not about public relations. They are about doing what this company was always supposed to do, starting with the people inside it. Rachel was offered a promotion. She sat across from Keanu when the offer was made and looked at it for a long time. "I don't know if I'm the right person," she said. "You've been doing the job," Keanu said. "You just haven't had the title or the pay." She accepted. Her first act in the new role was to redesign the new employee orientation. The version that had existed before was a list of tasks and a warning about performance reviews. The version she created started with a different kind of document, a clear statement of what employees were entitled to: accurate pay, safe working conditions, the ability to raise concerns without retaliation, and treatment that reflected their value as human beings rather than their position in a hierarchy. She worked with the HR team to develop training scenarios built around real situations. The moment when a manager's request crosses a line, how to recognize when something is wrong, who to contact and how. I used to feel invisible, she told the first group of new employees she trained. I came in every day doing my job as well as I could, and I still felt like I didn't matter. Like I was replaceable and entirely beside the point. She paused. My job now is to make sure you never feel that way. Because you matter. What you do here matters, and anyone who tells you differently is wrong. Earl's transformation was quieter. When Keanu asked him to help develop the manager training component of the work of respect, Earl's initial response was a long pause. I cook burgers, he said. I don't know anything about corporate training. I've watched people around here for 2 weeks, Keanu said. The way your coworkers talk to you, the way they trust you, the way they come to you when things are hard. He paused. That's not something you can manufacture. I don't need you to deliver content. I need you to tell the truth about what you've seen. Earl agreed. What he said in the training sessions was not polished or structured. It was direct and honest, and it landed in a way that scripted content almost never does. I stayed quiet for 3 years, he told a room of newly promoted managers. Not because I was cowardly, because I was calculating. I knew what speaking up had cost other people, and I decided my family was worth more than the principle. He stopped for a moment. I still think that calculation was the right one for me at the time. But I also know what it cost the people around me that I stayed quiet. And that's something I'll be working out for the rest of my life. He looked around the room. Your job is not to be liked. It's not to hit your numbers. It's to be the kind of person that the people who work for you can trust. That's it. That's the whole thing. When they trust you, everything else follows. When they don't, everything else eventually breaks. He paused. You are going to be tested. There will be pressure from above to cut corners in ways that hurt the people below you. There will be moments when looking away is easier than looking at what's happening. I'm asking you, right now, before any of that happens, to decide who you're going to be in those moments. Before the moment arrives. Because when the moment arrives, it arrives fast. Blake completed the company's management training program and was offered a full-time shift supervisor position. On the day his promotion was confirmed, he called Keanu's office. Not to thank him. To each ask, is there a way? Blake said, to make the new employee orientation specifically include information about what wage theft looks like. Not theoretical. Specific. What to watch for on your own pay stub. There was. Blake helped write it. Sandra became the company's director of employee advocacy, a newly created position reporting directly to the CEO, with authority to investigate any complaint across any location, regardless of the seniority of the people involved. When she spoke at the first all-company address after accepting the role, she was direct in the way of someone who had paid for her directness and decided it was worth the price. I was fired for telling the truth, she said. I spent a year of my life rebuilding from that, wondering if I had made the right choice, wondering if it would have been smarter to stay quiet, keep my head down, protect myself. She paused. I don't wonder that anymore. I know it was right. Not because everything worked out for me. It didn't, not for a long time. But because the truth I told eventually reached someone who did something with it. And my job now is to make sure the next person who tells the truth doesn't have to wait as long for someone to listen. She looked out at the room. If you see something wrong, in your location, in your region, anywhere in this company, come to me. Call the reporting line, send an email, send a letter with no return address if that's the only way you feel safe. She paused. Someone will read it. I promise you that. The training materials that came out of all of this were different from anything the company had produced before. No actors, no scripts, no carefully lit setting designed to project stability and confidence. Just people telling the truth about what they had experienced. Rachel talking about checking orders 3 times, not because she thorough, but because she was terrified of giving Craig any excuse to criticize her. The specific daily exhaustion of performing competence under surveillance, when the surveillance itself was designed to break you. Earl talking about what it felt like to make the decision to stay quiet. How he had told himself it was practicality. How practicality and cowardice looked the same from the outside and sometimes from the inside too. Blake talking about being assigned to the worst tasks on his first week, not because they needed doing, but because someone with authority had decided to find out how much he could take before he pushed back. About what that does to a young person's understanding of what work is supposed to be. About the way it can make you believe, if you're not careful, that being broken down is the price of belonging. Sandra talking about the moment she filed the HR complaint, the clarity of knowing it was right. The fear that had accompanied the clarity. The weak silence from HR that she had tried to convince herself was a sign they were investigating carefully rather than a sign they had buried it. At the end of the materials, a single line appeared. No one should have to survive their job. The materials circulated beyond the company almost immediately. Other organizations requested copies. Labor rights groups shared them. Business schools added them to curriculum. Within 18 months, they had reached places and people that nobody in the original room had anticipated. Keanu returned to Victorville on a quiet Thursday, months later. He walked in through the front door, like any other customer. The restaurant was different, not dramatically. The same tables, the same counter, the same fryer in the back. But the air was different. There was noise in it, laughter between orders. An employee and a customer exchanging a joke. The sound of a place that had been given permission to be what it was supposed to be. He ordered at the counter. Rachel was working the register. When she saw him, her face did something genuine and unguarded. A smile that came from somewhere real rather than from the muscles trained to produce one under duress. "Good to see you," she said. "Good to see you," he said. "How are things?" She glanced back at the kitchen. Earl was at the grill, moving with his characteristic, unhurried efficiency. Blake was at the beverage station, talking with a customer about something that was making them both laugh. "Better every day," she said. He took his tray to the corner booth, the same corner booth where he had sat for 2 weeks watching a restaurant fail the people it was supposed to serve. A man came through the front door. Worn clothes, hesitant posture, the careful pre-rejected stance of someone who has learned to expect to be turned away. The young woman at the second register looked up. "Welcome to Open Door Kitchen," she said. Her voice was warm, direct, like she meant it because she did. "What can I get you today?" The man blinked. Then a small, slow smile crossed his face. "Thank you," he said. "Just thank you for asking." Keanu watched from the corner booth. He thought about Harold, about a cold night in Reno and a conversation that had planted something, about the distance between what a place promises and what it delivers, and about the work required to close that distance. Not once in the founding, but continuously, every day, in every small decision made by every person with any degree of authority over another. He thought about what it actually meant to lead, not to manage, not to optimize, not to extract the maximum from the minimum while calling it efficiency. To lead, to be the kind of person that the people around you can trust. To treat the most vulnerable person in the room as well as you treat the most powerful. To understand that the measure of an institution is not the face it presents to the public, but what happens in the ordinary moments when no one important is watching. So, he finished his meal. He left a note for Rachel with the manager on duty. The note said simply, "Keep going. What you're building here matters." He walked out into the California afternoon. The sun was where it always was. The traffic on the street was the same traffic it always was. Everything looked ordinary from the outside. But inside that restaurant, something was different than it had been. People were being seen. And that was the whole of it. That was, in the end, the only thing that had ever really mattered. There is something worth saying about what this story is and what it isn't. It is not a story about a famous person using their power to punish people who were unkind to them. It is not a story about a dramatic confrontation producing a clean and satisfying reversal. It is a story about the ordinary, invisible harm that happens every day in workplaces where the people with authority forget or never knew what authority is actually for. Douglas Merritt told himself he was managing efficiently. Craig told himself he was enforcing standards. The HR department that buried Centran complaint itself, it was protecting institutional stability. None of them understood that what they were doing was not management or enforcement or stability. It was a decision, made over and over again in small moments, to treat the people under them as instruments rather than as people. To extract what was available rather than to protect what was entrusted to them, and the people who suffered under those decisions. Rachel, Earl, Blake, Sandra, and everyone else across 9 locations were not statistics. They were people who came to work every day and tried to do their jobs well, and trusted that someone, somewhere, in the structure they were working within, was paying attention. The lesson is not about famous people at restaurant chains. It is about the questions that Earl eventually put into words, standing in front of a room of newly promoted managers. Who are you going to be when the moment arrives? Not when someone important is watching. Not when the outcome is certain. When the moment arrives fast, and the easiest thing is to look away, and nobody will ever know that you did. Who are you going to be then? That question is not answered once. It is answered every day. In small decisions, in the choice to record someone's hours accurately or to round them down. In the choice to listen to a concern or to file it somewhere it won't be found. In the choice to treat the person in front of you as a person rather than as a problem to be managed. Those choices accumulate. They become the culture of a place. They become the thing that Rachel felt every day in her body before she could put it into words. And they become, when they go the other way, the thing that makes a man walking through a door slow down and look up when someone says across a counter, "Welcome. What can I get you today?" That is the standard. It sounds simple. It is simple, which is not the same as easy, but it is the work, and it is worth doing. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below what stayed with you. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you. The training video that the company eventually produced was shown in boardrooms and break rooms across 34 locations. It was not a professional production. There were no actors, no lighting rigs, no script approved by a communications team. Just a camera, a room, and 4 people sitting in the chairs where they worked every day, saying what was true. Rachel went first. "I used to check every order 3 times, she said. Not because I'm careful by nature. Because I was afraid. Because I knew that if something was wrong, if a bag was sealed incorrectly, if a receipt was misplaced, the response would not be, 'Let's fix it.' The response would be, 'What did you do wrong?' And that question, every day, in 100 small ways, starts to feel like the answer is always you." She looked at the camera without blinking. "I want every person who works in a place like this to know something. If you are asking yourself every day whether you are good enough, whether you are fast enough, whether you are the problem, stop. Look around you. Ask whether the environment itself is the problem, because the answer might be yes, and knowing that is the beginning of being able to do something about it." Earl went next. He sat in the same chair he sat in every break, with the same posture he brought to everything. Straight, present, unhurried. He was not performing calm. He was calm. "I want to talk to the managers watching this," he said. "Not the ones who already understand what I'm going to say. The ones who don't." He paused. "You are going to be given power over people's livelihoods. That is a serious thing. It is more serious than most job descriptions make it sound. The person on the other side of your decisions, the one you assign or whose hours you adjust or whose complaint you discourage, that person has a life that extends in every direction beyond whatever moment you're managing. They have rent due and family depending on them and history that you will never know, and a sense of their own worth that is fragile in ways they may not even admit to themselves." He looked at the camera. "You can protect that, or you can damage it. And you will do one or the other in every interaction, whether you intend to or not. The only question is which one you choose to do deliberately." Blake's segment was the shortest. He talked about his first week, about being given bathroom duty, not because the bathrooms needed cleaning, but because someone wanted to see if he would quit. About what that does to a person starting out, how it communicates, before a single formal thing has been said, that the relationship between employee and employer is fundamentally adversarial, that you will be tested by being broken down before you are trusted by being built up. "I almost quit," he said, "not because the work was hard, because the work felt designed to make me feel worthless. Those are very different things." He paused. The reason I didn't quit was Earl. Not because Earl said anything specific. Just because I could watch him every day and see that it was possible to be in this environment and still be yourself. To keep going without letting the place decide who you were. He looked at the camera. That's what good people in hard workplaces do for each other. Without knowing it, without being asked. Just by refusing to be ground down completely, they give everyone around them something to hold on to. Sandra's segment was last. She talked about the moment she filed the complaint. About the specific decision. The one she had made sitting at her kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night with her documentations spread out in front of her and the knowledge that submitting it was going to cost her something. I knew what was likely to happen, she said. Not for certain, but I knew. And I submitted it anyway. Because I had watched people around me absorb things that should not have been acceptable, and each time they absorbed them without protest, those things became more acceptable. The floor kept moving. She paused. I decided the floor had moved far enough. She looked at the camera with the directness of someone who has been through something real and come out the other side still standing. If you are watching this and you know what I'm talking about, if you have documentation sitting somewhere that you haven't submitted because you're afraid of what it will cost you, I want you to know that your fear is reasonable and your concern is real. The cost is real. And I also want you to know that someone, somewhere, is waiting to read what you send. Not every system works the way mine did. Not every complaint disappears. Some of them reach people who do something with them. She paused again. Send it. Send it to us. Send it to the labor board. Send it to whoever will listen. But don't let the floor keep moving. The video was released on a Monday morning. By Friday, it had been shared across several labor advocacy networks. By the following month, 3 other companies in the food service industry had reached out requesting permission to use it in their own training programs. Within a year, it had been adapted into a curriculum component at 2 California state colleges that offered workforce development courses. None of this was planned. None of it was coordinated. It spread the way honest things spread because it said something that a lot of people recognized from their own lives, and recognition is one of the most powerful forces in human communication. There is a photograph on the wall of the Victorville location of Open Door Kitchen. It was taken the day Rachel officially became assistant manager. Nothing formal. Someone had pulled out a phone and taken a picture of the moment, and it had ended up printed and framed because it captured something that felt worth keeping. In the photograph, Rachel is standing behind the counter. She is not smiling in the posed, professional way of an official photograph. She is laughing at something someone said just before the shutter clicked, and the laugh is completely real. The kind of laugh that takes over a face unexpectedly. Earl is standing beside her, spatula still in hand from the grill, with his characteristic expression of someone who finds things quietly funny without making a production of it. Blake is at the edge of the frame, slightly blurred, clearly in motion, mid-step between one task and next, because that is how he moves through a shift. Always in the direction of the next thing that needs doing. It is not a remarkable photograph by any conventional standard, but it is the photograph of a workplace where people feel safe enough to laugh, where they can be caught mid-motion without bracing for consequences, where a camera appearing doesn't make everyone straighten up and perform. That is the measure of a place. Not the awards on the wall, not the profit margins, not the efficiencies metrics, whether the people inside it can be fully themselves on an ordinary Tuesday. Keanu Reeves, when he was later asked about the Victorville situation in an interview, a question he fielded carefully and briefly, declining to make himself the story, said something that the interviewer included in the final piece because it was the clearest thing said in the whole conversation. He said, "I didn't fix anything. I just looked at what was actually there." The people in that restaurant were the ones who kept going when it was hard, who kept records when no one was asking them to, who stayed when they had every reason to leave. I just happened to be the person with access to do something with what they already knew. He paused. The lesson I took from it wasn't about oversight or systems or legal mechanisms, though all of those matter. The lesson was simpler than that. Someone took the time to write me a letter by hand. They didn't know if I'd read it. They didn't know if it would make any difference. They just decided that doing nothing was no longer something they could live with. He looked at the interviewer. That's where everything starts. Not with the famous person. With the person who decides to write the letter. Every open-door kitchen location now has, somewhere near the entrance, a small printed card. It says nothing elaborate. It says, if something isn't right, tell us. We will read it. We will act on it. Your voice matters here. Below that is a phone number and an email address. Both lead to Sandra's office. She reads every message personally. She responds to everyone. On the days when the messages are difficult, and some of them are very difficult, describing situations that take time and care and legal support to address. She has a habit she developed in the first few months of the job. She goes back and reads the original letter, the one that started all of this. Handwritten, on lined notebook paper, pressed into the page with the effort of someone who had been holding it in for a long time. Please, if you are the person people say you are, please help us. She reads it to remind herself what the work is for. And then she picks up the phone and makes the call that needs to be made. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below what stayed with you. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you. There is something that happened during the 14th day. The day before, Keanu revealed himself. That didn't make it into any of the formal accounts of what occurred in Victorville. He was sitting in the corner booth, finishing his second coffee of the afternoon, when a woman came through the door. She was in her 60s. Moving carefully, the way people move when the body has started to cost them something. She was wearing a coat that had been good once and was still being treated as though it was. She looked at the menu above the counter with the expression of someone making a calculation. She ordered the smallest thing on the menu, coffee. She asked the price twice, carefully, before she confirmed the order. Rachel took her order, and then, without being asked, without any visible consultation with anyone, Rachel put a small bag on the tray alongside the coffee. The woman looked at it. I didn't order that. I know, Rachel said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, warm without making anything of it. It's just something extra. We have it. The woman looked at Rachel for a moment. Then she took the tray. She sat 2 tables from Keanu. She ate slowly. She drank her coffee the way people drink things they are making last. When she left, she stopped at the counter. "Thank you," she said to Rachel. "Any time," Rachel said. Keanu watched this exchange from his corner booth. He thought, this is why. Not the investigation, not the confrontation with merit, not the press conference or the training programs or the policy changes. This is why. A woman who was making careful calculations about what she could afford, and a young woman behind a counter who saw that and responded to the actual human situation rather than the transactional one, without fanfare, without making it a moment. Just a bag on a tray, anytime. That was the restaurant he had started 11 years ago. That was the promise. It had survived. Imperfectly, in fragments, in individuals who had maintained it against the pressure of a system designed to grind it down. Rachel had maintained it even while her own pay was being stolen, even while she was afraid, even while she was crying in the break room because no one was asking whether something was fine. She had maintained the promise. Because some things, when they are genuinely in a person, are harder to extinguish than the people doing the extinguishing understand. The 6 months after everything became public were not easy for the company. Revenue at the 9 affected locations dropped significantly in the initial period as the story circulated. Some customers still stayed away, not in protest, but in the particular discomfort people feel when an institution they trusted is revealed to have been something other than what they thought. Some employees at uninvolved locations requested transfers or resigned, uncertain about what the revelations meant for the company's stability or culture. There were difficult conversations in board meetings, difficult questions from investors about governance and oversight. Keanu answered them. He answered them honestly and at length, which is not the approach most crisis communications advisors recommend, but is the approach he had decided on and did not deviate from. He said, "We failed the people we were built to serve. We allowed a management structure that prioritized margins over the welfare of the workers who created those margins. We are accountable for that, and we are making specific structural changes to ensure it cannot happen the same way again." He said, "I am not asking you to forgive the failure. I am asking you to watch what we do next." What they did next was visible and specific and took longer than anyone wanted it to. The anonymous reporting line received its first call 3 days after it went live. Sandra personally handled the follow-up. The issue, a scheduling irregularity at a location in Fresno, was investigated within a week and resolved within a month. The word spread, not loudly. The way these things spread when they're real rather than performed. Person to person, in break rooms and parking lots, in the specific language of people who work in places where they have learned not to trust what they are told, but might, carefully, begin to trust what they see. By the end of the first year, the reporting line had received 63 contacts. 11 had led to formal investigations. 7 of those investigations had produced findings that resulted in management changes or policy corrections. None of the people who made those reports lost their jobs. That last fact mattered more than all the others combined. Douglas Merritt served his sentence. He did not speak publicly during the proceedings. His attorney issued statements on his behalf that were legal in character, focused on process, on circumstances, on the details of restitution. But there was one moment in the sentencing hearing when the judge asked if Merritt wanted to address the court before sentence was pronounced. He stood up. He looked at the room, at the attorneys, at the journalists in the gallery, at the row of people from the 9 affected locations who had been invited to be present if they chose. Rachel was there, Earl, Sandra, several others. He looked at them for a long time. What he said was brief. "I told myself what I was doing was necessary," he said. "That I was making hard decisions that kept the company viable. That the small amounts I was taking from individual employees were inconsequential." He stopped. "Sitting here today, I understand that the word inconsequential was the whole of the problem. The people I stole from were not inconsequential. Their $90 a week was not inconsequential. And my willingness to treat them that way, to do the arithmetic of their suffering and decide it didn't matter, that is the thing I will spend a long time thinking about." He sat down. It was not an exoneration. It was not a redemption arc. It was the beginning, maybe, of something that would take years to understand fully, if it was ever fully understood. But it was honest. And honesty, in a proceeding built on the documentation of dishonesty, landed with a particular weight. Keanu sent a brief message to Sandra the evening after the sentencing. It said, "Today mattered. The people who were there, it mattered that they were there. Thank you for making sure they could be." Sandra read the message at her desk, Director of Employee Advocacy Office, a room she still sometimes stopped to look at in mild disbelief. The way you look at things that don't quite fit the story you had expected your life to tell. She typed a response. It said, "They came because they wanted to." That's the whole story, isn't it? People deciding to show up. She sent it. Then she turned back to the 17 messages in her inbox that needed responses. She worked until 8 that evening. Then she went home. Then she came back the next morning and did it again. That is the work. It does not end. It is not supposed to end. It is just supposed to continue. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below what stayed with you. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.